As a kid, I loved to read history, all kinds of history, but in particular, I loved to read about great sailors and naval commanders, from explorers like Francis Drake or Columbus, Magellan, Raleigh, Clark, or Cook, to great naval heroes like Lord Nelson or John Paul Jones or Oliver Hazard Perry. These were men who sailed the oceans, and also the Greeks and the Romans, and of course, the Vikings, who would sail wherever they wanted. Many great stories and fascinating adventures as they would sail upon the sea, always having a place to go or a purpose to be there. And of course, the ships that they sail on were things like the triremes from the Greeks and the Romans to the long ships. I'm sure we all know the long ships of the Vikings. And of course, the frigates that the United States or England or Spain and Portugal used. And of course, now what do we have? We have these massive ships that are, essentially floating cities, and we use them for pleasure like cruise ships. I'm sure many folks have been on cruise ships for vacation, but also, ships of war like destroyers and aircraft carriers. These are massive, massive ships. And I'm sure, as we've watched movies, we've seen probably more than one where a ship is in a storm. And it's sailing, this tiny ship is sailing upon massive waves that are just going all over the place. And it's always, the center point of the story, if it's on the ocean, where they're in this great storm and it's all that they can do to survive. And from ancient times, people have been drawn to the sea. Even now, people will spend a year sailing about on the ocean. And so it continues to draw people in. It's a lure that mankind just desires to be on the ocean, desires to navigate and see where to go. At first, ships would have to stay very close to the shore because if they got too far out to sea, they wouldn't know how to get back. And over time, sailors learn how to navigate, by various methods. The stars, then the compasses, nautical charts, of course, spyglasses. If everyone's seen pirate movies with the spyglass they use to see land ahoy. And, now they use gyroscopic compasses, radar, binoculars, and of course, GPS, right? With GPS, it's hard to get lost unless it goes down, of course. And while, there isn't complete control in navigating the oceans, we've become more and more controlled in how we navigate, how we can go from place to place. Cruise ships are such where they know exactly when they're going to be at various ports, right? Almost like a train where they can just run exactly on time, even over these massive expanses of water. And of course, the most important thing of navigating is what? The parts of the boat that are used to make it go where you want. Things like rudders or oars or sails or engines and anchors. And of course, the helm, right? Either the wheel that you're steering by or the tiller that you use, where the captain decides where to go by how to turn the ship, which of course turns the rudder, they'll adjust the sails, whatever type of boat they're on. And of course, not all boats are huge or massive. I, never had the ability to sail on triremes or frigates or long ships, but I love to canoe. I've canoed since I was quite young, and growing up in the church, I was able to go to many different trips in the boundary waters. I went to SEP for a number of years, and even as a church group before that, and after that, our teen and young people group would go and go into the boundary waters for a week, for 2 weeks, and just paddle around, fish, do whatever. More recently, I've been able to go on several long trips down the Missouri River in Montana, be able to spend a week or more just paddling down a river is great fun for me. I love to do that. And as you when you're canoeing, you start to learn different strokes. There's the J stroke, the C stroke, there's prise and draws, reverse strokes. So you even learn how, if you're in the stern, how to turn the paddle so that you can make the canoe go exactly where you want. And if you have some experience, you can become, quite good at it. Even in pretty rough water, you can pretty much have the canoe go wherever you want. And if you've spent any time in a canoe, you can understand the idiom up a creek without a paddle. Because as soon as you take your paddle out of the water, what starts happening? The canoe just kind of does whatever it wants. It just starts to turn and twist, and it can actually get pretty unstable because, the dynamics of the boat tend to put you in positions where if you hit a rock or, even a decent-sized wave, it can make you tip and turn and become much more unstable. And so it's always best to keep your paddle in the canoe. This past summer, Hunter and Finn and I went on a canoe trip down the Missouri with the Boy Scouts. And, Hunter and Finn one day got together, and Hunter, being older, younger brothers, they didn't work so well together part of the time. And Hunter was just in the back, just paddling as hard as he could go, and they were going all over the place. And anyway, it was a fun thing to watch as a parent because you could see exactly what was going on. And during this time, I was with somebody else, and we weren't really paddling, and we were still going faster than them. I just had my paddle in the water, and I was just twisting and turning it just the right amount and letting the river take us by. And the Missouri River is pretty fast. It goes about 3 miles an hour. So, we were going pretty hard and or pretty fast, and Hunter and Finn were just, zigzagging all over the place. They would have been better to probably take their paddles out of the water. But, sailing is often used, or being on the water is often used as a metaphor for life, right? And it's easy to see why, because navigating life's challenges, one of the phrases that we use can be just like trying to navigate a ship on the sea. We lay our plans, we chart our course, we push hard on the helm, right? Trying to make the ship go where we want, trying to have our life follow a path that we've mapped out. And, throughout our lives, we can sometimes be seemingly on calm water, where it's very easy to go where we want. But sometimes we can be in great stormy seas, where it feels like we have no control. But all the time, what do? We try to keep our hand on the helm. We try to steer and guide the boat, our life, in the direction that we're striving for. And all of us here have similar goals, right? We're striving for what? We're striving for the kingdom of God. We're striving for God's way of life. But there's an interesting word in the Old Testament, though, that might point us in a different direction. Because as the example of Hunter and Finn, sometimes we can put in a lot of effort, we can put in a lot of struggle and not really go where we want to go. They ended up hitting the shore, and Finn got out of the boat because they were very upset with each other. But that's not where they wanted to go. They weren't trying to aim for hitting the shore. But that's what we can often do in life, right? When we're trying to struggle against all that life sends at us. But this word in the Old Testament, Tay Baw, only appears in 2 places. In Greek and Hebrew, there's several words for ships, and Tay Baw is not one of them. Just one example in the prophecy of Jacob to his sons in the book of Genesis. This is Genesis 49:13. It says, "Zebulun shall dwell by the haven of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships." And this word ship is not Tay Baw. Tay Baw is a different word. And there's, as I mentioned, there's 3 different Hebrew words, a couple Greek words that are used for boats or ships throughout. And this is, what I would be talking about, whether it be a canoe or a large ship or a long ship or a trireme. This is the type of boat, maybe a small fishing boat. This is what these words mean, a ship. But Tay Baw is different. And as I said, it's only used in 2 different parts of the Bible. Noah and the flood, and the baby Moses when he was saved on the Nile. This word Tay Baw, it says it comes from perhaps a foreign word, so it wasn't necessarily native to Hebrew, but it means a box, an ark. That's what we would more commonly call it, an ark, Noah's Ark, of course. And then, how we generally describe Moses, it's the basket that Moses was put in. And the Greek word that was used to describe Noah's Ark is similar, and it makes clear what's being described in these 2 stories. This is kibitos, It's G2787, and it means, again, a box. And it's used for both the sacred ark, so describing the Ark of the Covenant, and Noah's Ark. And now, what is different between a box and a ship? You can make a box float, right? It's often you can set it out on the water. But what is a box missing? The most important part of a ship. There's no way to steer it. There's no way to guide it. There's no way to direct it. It just goes where it will. I'm sure as a child, if you lived by any water, you might throw a stick in a stream, and where does it go? Wherever the currents take it, right? Do you know in advance? No, it just kind of floats down the river. Maybe it gets stuck on the side. Maybe it, veers off course. Maybe it gets stuck on a rock. Any number of things, but you have no control. Because by not having a rudder, not having a helm, you've given up control. And so this word, teva, that's used, there's no way to control it. It's a sea-going vessel that can't be controlled, at least by human hands. Where they went, where these arks went, was completely dependent upon the hand of God steering and directing where it would go. Moses was put in as a baby. His mother put him in and then let him go down the Nile River. Noah, of course, gathered up animals, gathered up his family, got in a boat, and then the water started to rise and it just went. He had no control over where it would go. But these two stories had salvation at the end of them. The survival of the entire human race and all breathing life on earth, and the survival and the freedom of Israel were dependent entirely upon reaching safety. And they were entirely dependent upon God. They had no control. They had no way to steer the ship where it would go, to steer around dangers, to steer around places that they didn't want to go. So in Genesis and in Exodus, a person is sent upon a perilous journey that in each case, the salvation of people was dependent on that journey ending safely. And in both cases, neither one knew where they would end up, did they? They didn't know where they would finally come to rest, or even if they would. Moses is, as a baby, floating down the Nile River. Well, it doesn't say exactly where he was put in, but the Israelites lived where? The land of Goshen. Well, where's the land of Goshen? It's in the Nile River, up close to the Mediterranean Sea. Imagine if his basket would have caught a current and gone right out to sea. That basket could have floated forever, could still be floating around, right? And so in both of these cases, they were sent on perilous journey that was entirely dependent on God for where it would come and that it would reach there safely. But the salvation of mankind in one case and the salvation of the Israelites were dependent on it going to the right time and place. It's easy to read these stories and not understand the full extent of God's hand in their survival, their safety, and ultimately their salvation. If you turn to Genesis, we'll just read a bit of both of these stories because we of course know them well, right? These are two of the more famous stories in the Bible. I'm sure Noah's Ark, we've all seen the picture of the ark with the giraffe's head sticking out and, had child stories read to us, or, with Moses in the basket. I'm guessing most people have read the Ten Commandments or seen the Ten Commandment movie. And so, you have that picture of a basket floating down the Nile River. But here in Genesis 6:13, it says, "And God said to Moses, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark, teva, of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and outside with pitch. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, and its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits." Now, what God is telling Noah to do here is to build this massive ship. And if, based off of what we understand, the size of a cubit, this would have been one of the largest wooden vessels ever made. Almost to the maximum amount that a wooden vessel can be built. So this was a huge ship. Very, very large. And even, even in today's term, it would still have been a massive ship. I was looking online, and it gave examples of different ships and how the ark was relative to it. And it was about half the size of the largest metal ship ever built. So this is how big that the ark was. And so God here is telling Moses, take your family, take all the animals that we're going to save, put yourself into this box. You have no control. You have no way to save yourself. You have no ability to choose where it goes, but stick yourself in it and then just wait for the waters to come. Right? And then if we drop down, we know kind of how the story begins. And if we drop down to Genesis 7:17, it says, now the flood was on the earth 40 days. So of course, they're in this box, and the waters begin to rise. Now, as it begins to rise, what's still all around? Trees and rocks and mountains. Now, I don't know if you've ever, again, if you've spent any time in a canoe or something like that, but what happens even a small rock if you run a canoe over? It can quickly put a big gash in it. What would happen to the ark if it, tore over the front, the top of, let's say, Mount Rainier? Probably wouldn't survive. You'd have a big hole filled with water and it would sink. But this is what they have gone through. For 40 days, as the water begins to rise, the ark is just floating around. They have no control. They can, possibly go up on the deck, see what's coming, and not have any ability to fix it. Right? You could imagine, not Moses, Noah going up on the deck and seeing this massive mountain coming towards him. Well, I guess the boat's coming towards the mountain. And he'd have no ability to steer the ark away. It would just rip through the bottom of the ark, and they would then be dead. It goes on, the waters increased and lifted up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. So again, here, now this ark is completely filled, or the earth is completely filled with water. The ark is going, just around. And you might think, well, now there's some safety. But what did I, say at the beginning when I was talking about canoes? If you just lift your paddle out and let the canoe go wherever it might, the canoe starts to become unstable because it's being hit and pushed about by the water as opposed to gliding through the water. So when you don't have control, when you're not making a boat or a vessel go in a certain direction, it actually becomes less stable. So for 40 days, they're on this water with no ability to add stability to the boat. It's just floating, probably tossing back and forth. And it says the waters prevailed and greatly increased on the earth, and the ark moved about on the surface of the water. And the waters prevailed exceedingly in all the high hills. So now at least the hills have been covered with water, so you don't have that problem with the mountains or the hills potentially ripping through the ark. But what then happens after? If you drop down, it says, so he destroyed all living things which were on the face of the earth, both man and cattle, creeping things and birds of the air, and they were destroyed from the earth. Only Noah and those who were with him in the ark remained alive. And the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. So again, for 150 days, this ark is tossed to and fro. Noah has no control over where it's going, how it goes. But he's locked himself in, dependent entirely on God for his survival. This is what, of course, the psalmist means by "I put my trust in the Lord God." Noah not only had put himself, but had put all of mankind, the future of mankind, the future of all breathing things upon the earth, in the hands of God for survival. It says, and then as it goes down, if this wasn't dangerous enough, in Genesis 8:1, it says, then God remembered Noah and every living thing in all the waters or all the animals that were with him on the ark, and God made a wind pass over the earth. Now, what happens with wind and water? You start to get waves, big waves. So now, not only have they gone 190 days on the earth, floating about with no control. Now there's a great wind that they've become, tossed to and fro even more. And it says the fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were also stopped, and the rain and rains from heaven were restrained, and the waters receded continually from the earth. Now, what happens when the water starts to recede? The mountains are exposed. Once again, there's danger that they'll just run aground, that they'll be ripped open. But what happens? It says, then the ark rested in the 7th month, the 7th day of the month, on the mountains of Arafat. Now again, I don't know, if you spent much time in a canoe or a boat, but I can assure you, if you're not trying to stop a boat as it's coming aground, it doesn't just rest gently, does it? If you hit going at any kind of speed without slowing down, you're going to get a big jerk. You can damage a canoe. I've seen canoes, the front, even with the best of materials being used, get big dents or even holes in the front by kids slamming into the shore. Having rocks come up, take out, parts of the canoe. And so you can imagine that for an ark, this massive boat that had been floating about for, more than 100 days, that it wouldn't just naturally, gently rest on a mountain, would it? What would more likely happen? It would hit it, get a big hole in the side, and be destroyed. So of course, God's hand was here, right? God's hand was there on the ark, guiding it and directing it so it rested on this mountain. Again, not something that would naturally happen. So, as I say, you have this massive ark floating aimlessly with winds and rains being tossed to and fro. The waters start to recede. The mountains are exposed. And Arafat is a tall mountain, or at least what we think is Mount Arafat or Ararat, but it's not the highest. So before it could rest on Mount Ararat, there were other mountains it could have run into, it could have hit. But God's hand, of course, was there. Noah needed no rudder, Noah needed no helm, because the hand of God was what was guiding and steering his box. What about the story of Moses? Again, we all probably have in mind the 10 Commandments when we think about the story of Moses. His mother, says, Exodus 2:2, so the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a beautiful child, and just a note here, because this is an interesting one, this word beautiful is actually the same word that's used in the creation, where God said he saw it was good. So here, basically what God is saying is just like he saw the creation, his creation as good day after day after day as he created new things, Moses' mother saw him and said he was good in much the same respect. But it goes on and it says, but when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark. So again, what we think of as a basket, took this ark of bulrushes for him, dabbed it with asphalt and pitch, put the child in it, laid it in the reeds by the river's bank, and his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside, and when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And again, it seems easy, doesn't it? Just Moses' mom puts him in a basket and an ark, and voila. The daughter of Pharaoh finds him, picks him up. No danger, right? We saw it in 10 Commandments, very, very easy. Miriam walked along the river bank, saw that everything was good, went back and told Moses' mom. But what about the Nile River? When you go and look up some of the most dangerous rivers in the world, the Nile River is always near the top. It's not like the Amazon, but it has crocodiles. It has hippopotamuses. It has venomous snakes. So imagine she puts it in the reeds. Well, what are in the reeds? Snakes. That's where they like to stay. They like to hide. The Egyptian cobra, poisonous, deadly snakes, right? All kinds of dangers could have happened to Moses. And while Miriam was nearby, it says she was there to let Moses' mom know what happened to him. She couldn't necessarily have protected him. As if you've ever swam in a river, something can quickly be picked up in the current and taken away. If a crocodile or a hippopotamus decided they wanted to play with that basket, Miriam would have been no help. What would have happened if Pharaoh's daughter wouldn't have come? I'm sure it was a well-planned, a reasoned, thought-out plan by Moses' mom. But once she put Moses in the basket, there was no control over what would happen. It was only God's hand that made those series of seemingly easy events that we can just read over and think, of course they would have happened, to have actually happened. The reason why we think that it was so easy is because God's hand just made it happen. But of course, as I said, any number of things could have happened. Moses could have been swept out as a baby out into the Mediterranean Sea. He could have been eaten by a crocodile. He could have been knocked over by a hippopotamus. He could have been bitten by a venomous snake. Moses' mom put him in the basket because if she hadn't, he surely would have died. 100% he would have been killed. So she put him in the basket and had Miriam tell her what happened because she knew there was a chance that he would survive. And of course, with God's hand, that chance was sure, but she didn't know in advance. She didn't know what would happen to Moses. She only wanted to give him a chance to survive. Now, you might be saying, these are old stories and stories that God, of course, would have specifically organized because they were part of his plan for mankind. In reading back, we can see that. We can see how important they were to the plan of God. So, of course, it makes sense that God would be there. His hand would personally guide these arcs to where they need to go. He would make sure they were safely met or safely went to their destination. Because none of mankind, no living thing or breathing thing would be on the earth if Moses' ark hadn't come to rest safely. Israel would not have been saved from Egypt if Moses would not have made it to the Pharaoh's daughter. So you can see why he would personally steer these events. These are big, important things. But what does it have to do about you and your life? Your life is a key part of God's plan. I've talked much about this. He created you uniquely. He's fitting you. He's shaping you. He's molding you as a living stone to be built up a spiritual house. He's making you part of his very family, part of his temple. Your whole life's journey is being used to shape you, to change you into eternal children that God desires. Yes, Moses and Noah had unique parts in the role and the plan of God, but you and I do too. God's plan won't be complete unless he, much like Noah and Moses, have us come safely to the destination that he chooses for us. God, time and time again, tells us this. He tells us not to worry, to put our trust that he will complete what he has begun, right? That he's not going to stop until he's had you reach safety for a final destination, right? And what is that destination? It's children in his family. Just like the Ark of Noah and the Ark of Moses, vessels that seemingly had no way to be directed where they would go, but in reality, had the surest hands guiding and directing their paths. If you want a hand on the helm, whose hand would you want? You'd want God. David says of God, he says, He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Right? His hand is there leading and guiding us. We, just like Moses' and Noah's ark, we have the surest hands guiding and directing our lives. We can't see it. Just like the ark, you couldn't see the rudder, you couldn't see a helm that would steer the ship, but you had God's invisible hand guiding and putting them in seemingly impossible places of safety, bringing them after a long journey to places of safety that had small chances of happening, very small. But with God, it was sure that it would happen. He can lead us and guide us through all of the certainty and uncertainty in our lives, through the calm, through the storm. We're being guided and directed and steered by our loving Father. His hand is upon us. His hand is upon you. His hand is upon I. That we, even when we have seemingly no control over where we're going, he's putting us on a path to where we need to be, where he wants us to be. Christ, and you all remember this story, Christ, in talking his disciples in Luke 12:22, he said to his disciples, "Therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, nor about the body that you will put on." And it goes on, and we, of course, know this well, right? Life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. And then it talks about the ravens, it talks about the lilies, it talks about the grass and how God directs all of those things. But then it goes on, dropping down to Luke 12:31, and says clearly, "But seek the kingdom of God, and all of these things shall be added to you. Do not fear, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." We are here to get into our ark, right? Both Noah and Moses had to make a choice. Well, with Moses, it was Moses' mom had to make a choice to put him in an ark. Noah had to make the choice to put his family, to put all of the animals in this ark, knowing that there was no control over the outcome, that they had no control over the outcome, but putting it in God's hand, that God would decide and choose where and how it would go. And so, of course, we have to do our part, but the important thing is that we have to get into our ark. We have to go on a journey, our journey of life. And when we do, God will do his part in guiding and steering us. He says that while we are to seek the kingdom of God, that we can only enter it through a narrow gate. It says, Matthew 7:13 and 14, "Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it." Right? It's easy. It's easy to go the broad gate. It's hard to go through the narrow gate, because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. Right? It takes great skill to navigate a boat through a narrow gate, doesn't it? If you have a narrow entrance and you have You have the water starting to rush in. When you narrow water, it starts to become faster, can make boats less stable, less able to steer. Right? None of us have that skill. None of us have the ability to navigate the narrow gate, difficult way that leads to life. It's a skill that David didn't have. It's a skill Abraham didn't have. Paul, Peter, Moses, Noah. None of them had the skill to navigate this narrow path into this narrow gate. You don't have it. I certainly don't have it. Only the hand of God guiding us through the narrow, difficult way can lead us to his kingdom. Right? It can sound completely absurd. Who would go about their life with no control, with no ability to direct it, to guide the path? That's absolutely against all human reasoning, all human wisdom. But that is what God shows us through Noah and Moses. If we want salvation, we have to let go. We have to let go of control. As was given in the first message, we have to show humility and meekness, willing to yield to God and his plan for us. And these are very similar stories. Right? This is what we see with Noah. We see with Moses' mother that they had to let go. They had to give up control. They had no ability to steer themselves or their loved ones to safety. It was only through God's hand that they were able to end their journeys in a safe way. And because of that, they were able to save all of mankind. They were able to save Israel. John, in his vision on Patmos, as he's standing before Christ in his full glory, it says he fell at Christ's feet as if he was dead. But then it says, but he, being Christ, laid his right hand on me, saying to me, do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. Christ started our journey, didn't he? With the Passover. He started this journey that we're on to be part of God's family, be part of God's kingdom, and he'll finish it. He'll be the first and the last for our personal journey. And how will he do it? As it says, his hand, his mighty right hand will be upon us, guiding us and steering our life. We don't have to be like Hunter and Finn, who were struggling mightily to go where they didn't even want to go. We can let our fears and cares and worries disappear because we know we're not aimless. We aren't rudderless. We aren't without ability to steer where we're going. It's just we can't see it because it's God's hand, his invisible hand, that's doing the work, that's choosing the direction, that's deciding the path that will ultimately lead us through that narrow gate. Right? And we can have full faith and confidence that his unseen hand is upon our lives, right? From the first to the last of our life. And all throughout, no matter how winding and unappealing sometimes it might be, the path that he's leading us on, it's always leading us to a destination, and that destination is his kingdom, is his family. It's leading us through that narrow gate, right? As it says, that's his good pleasure to bring us through into eternity, into his kingdom.